Well, welcome to the world of Christ-centered education podcast. Today, we are honored to introduce our guest, Adam, who has over 20 years of experience in education and organizational leadership. Adam has significant contribution to both international and locally in public and independent schools. He has a proven track record of guiding and partnering with other schools to find solutions for structural and organizational challenge that helps schools and nonprofit face. Now, Adam not currently is serving as a head of school and executive director at Langley Christian School. In addition to that, he also is playing a small role in where he serves as an independent school inspector at British Columbia Ministry of Education. He has various expertise and commitments to educational excellence and makes him a valuable asset to our educational community. So I am so excited to invite you into conversation with Adam and myself as we discuss the roles of Christian education and why it is essential for today's young generation. So welcome me in adding in Adam, inviting Adam.
Thank
Hi,
you, Jen.
Adam. How are
Hi,
you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you so much for inviting me to have this conversation.
Yes, for sure. We're so excited. And you and I, when we first spoke about this podcast, we were like, you know what, we need to make more awareness of what the value of Christian education is and what's going out there. And soon as I communicated that you were on board, and, I think it's such a divine connection to have this podcast because I believe this is going to be a great blessing to many education leaders who are in isolation, serving on isolations, and feel like, hey, you know what, there's more people out there, a more support system. So that was the heart behind for us to do this. So thank you for coming on board.
I love that. And I love this opportunity to have this cross-country connection as well, because the landscape is so diverse with independent Christian schools right across Canada. So to have this conversation, this opportunity to share what we're doing in this little neck of the woods here just outside of Vancouver is a great opportunity.
That's awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about Langley Christian School and what you do there, and a little special thing about what the school's about?
Well, we have a really simple mission. Our mission really is to equip kids with a bold faith and to help them discover their talents and their giftings so that they can live fully into the people that God intended them to be. We have a mission that is approaching 70 years old now. The school started in 1955 with 17
Wow.
students. And I think this coming year, K through 12 are going to be approaching 1,300 students. That's
Wow.
roughly 100 students per grade, spread between our elementary, middle, and high school campuses, which are all on one street in Langley, about 35 minutes from Vancouver. We also run a daycare facility and have a preschool junior kindergarten program. So all in, we're well over 1,300 kids, and I think we are somewhere over about 600 families. And the church backgrounds, we're a deliberately interdenominational school. So we have church backgrounds of well over 100 different churches in our community represented here in our student body.
Wow, that is awesome. So you got diverse of people, and as well as a real good experience on what that education looked like. So I would definitely encourage, if you're in that neighborhood of Langley, you got to check out Langley Christian School and ask for Adam. Maybe he might be able to say hi to you, but definitely come out and check the school out. It's a good community to be part of. So
Love that.
thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much, Adam, again for saying yes to this and coming on board and sharing your expertise and some of the topics that you and I spoke about. I want to just throw a question out to you because you have such a diverse experience in this area. And what does even Christian education look like today? So, what is the role of Christian education in the current culture? What is your thought on that?
Well, I think it's really, really important. There's so many things that we took for granted, I think, a generation or so ago in terms of the upbringing of our children and families connected in their local churches, but also just, communities like Langley were a lot more homogeneous, I think is the word. And we're increasingly diverse. The demographics are shifting. It's really, really important to Canadians that we maintain a pluralistic, democratic society. And to do so requires choices. It requires requires options for parents in terms of the types of schooling that they want for their kids. So I think first and foremost, Christian schools are really essential for maintaining that multicultural, multi-denominational mosaic of Canada. We can't have all of our children in schools designed to really make kids very similar or all alike. And so in terms of the just maintaining that that distinctive of Christian communities, I think is really important. And Christian schools play an important role in that. Increasingly so, as schools like ours, we for many families, we might be the most authentic connection or relationship that families have with a Christian community, and so we steward that very carefully. I think too, increasingly, I think we need a better vision for education. In British Columbia, we have this thing called the Educated Citizen, but it's a document, it's a guiding document for the public education system. And generally, I can maybe speak to how, in some ways, in BC, we're unique because we have multiple levels of independent, but all funded, provincially regulated schools. But this document essentially says that the primary value of somebody to be educated is that they have an economic utility, and we need a better vision, and we offer a much better vision here at our school, I think, than that of really helping children to live out a identity that is more than just what you do for the economy and what you add. Your value added to the world in terms of what you bring commercially. So
I like that. That's beautiful.
Yeah. So I think that's important. I think as well too, just an understanding in an increasing world. This is one of the things that I'd like to talk to more people about. Just we know that there's increasing use of robotics and artificial intelligence and dictating how we think. And so, what does it truly mean to be created in the image of God? And how do we that distinct uniqueness that God has woven into each of us? And to have schools that do deep thinking and conversations around that, I think is really important.
I like what you just said, and I know this is kind of a little bit different from what we talked about. I will, if you can give us a little bit insight. 20 years ago, what Christian education looked like to what now looks like.
Wow.
You know what I mean? Like that's a big transfer. Because in my generation, at least when my parents is like, here's my child, take him and Christian education, and that's it, right? Today's world, like Gen Zs and the millennials, when they think of Christian education, it's a little different from what the baby boomers might have thought of Christian education.
Yeah, I think so. I think like when I think about this, the area, they were really immigrant started or immigrant origins of European families who maybe Mennonite, maybe in the Reformed tradition. They came to this area. They and in some cases they built their schools before they built their churches, and it was massive sacrifice. And for a generation or two, it was just a given that if you went to such and such a church, you would send your kids to the Christian school that was affiliated to it. What shifted now, and this might be just, again, a consequence of the kind of world that we live in that is maybe more individualistic and more market driven. People want Christian education. They want to be rooted in a moral community, but they also want to ensure that their kids are getting a good education. And I think that's probably been the biggest shift. The other big shift that has been is because of that, a school like ours now attracts families from other church traditions that it historically didn't in maybe the first 30 or 40 years of the school's origins. There were churches in this community where you wouldn't find anybody attending a Christian school, but now most of the largest churches in the surrounding area to our school would all have students attending our school. So that's been a big shift as well, as just the interdenominational interest in our schools. And I think that partly has come about as a result of public schools. A generation were different too. I learned the Lord's Prayer in the local public school. I learned about Easter. Exactly. I learned the Christian narrative in the local public school. And as those schools have become increasingly secularized, parents still want to have school environments where their kids are rooted in those stories and they find their identity in them.
I love that. Exactly. And thank you for bringing that up. I think, and that's, I think it's very key for us as we're moving forward on what, as we're molding Christian education and the identity of Christ in these students, is that how do we work with the changing world that we are in? Because exactly like you said, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, our parents put building blocks of the church and the school together. Now it's a little bit transition of, it's almost like, hey, you know what, it's a local community event, right? The local community organization of that church, of school coming together, which is beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say further to that, I mean, I've spent roughly half my career in public schools. I've been a public school administrator in this very community as a principal of a local school, and really loved and benefited the relationships in those communities I worked with. And some of them still to this day, some of my people, some of my heroes in education still are in the local public district. But I would say one of the things that was, I think, troubling for me in many respects of it is that as we continued to deconstruct so many different things,
Right.
it was becoming more and more confused what exactly it was that we were grounding kids in. And
Exactly.
I think that's the deep work of Christian schools today, is that there's a huge opportunity to be really distinctive about what we're grounding our kids in.
That is awesome. Actually, that's amazing. So let's go to our next question on that is, what might a Christian education be more essential for the health of communities and the public good than ever before? What do you think of
Oh,
that?
big, exciting question. We could chat about this for hours, I think. But again, I would maybe circle back to just the necessity to maintain options for parents.
Right.
We know that we do great harm to communities, to people when we take away the opportunities to be really rooted in the values and traditions that are important to your identity, important to your families. And so it's I think increasingly important that we have spaces where we can root kids in these things, and that their education can actually be viewed through those lenses, which is really important. I think just really understanding how education is really formative, and the values and the norms that
Exactly.
lead to healthy adult lives are formed in schools. And so we need to be really clear about what those are, is not unintentional about them. I think the other piece to it as well is we're learning more and more. There's a book we're reading. I'm sure most educators are reading out there right now, called The Anxious Generation by one of my favorite authors, Jonathan Haidt. And he's a secular social scientist, and yet in chapter 8 of his book, he admits that the current phone-based childhood of kids has replaced the sacred. It's replaced the spiritual communities that kids were once a part of. And we know that kids need predictable routines. We know that kids need to experience emotional safety through norms and through stories and routines and traditions. And we can provide those in Christian schools. We can provide a greater story that is older than yourself and bigger than yourself.
Exactly.
You're not the hero of your story, and you get to be part of this centuries old tradition that really roots you in something bigger than yourself, which I think is really important. And then the other thing I would add to that too is it's not controversial to say that volunteerism, community service, charity, philanthropy, these things are all on the decline across Canadian society. And in these schools, we have models of people doing all those things in spades. And so kids grow up enculturated in this embodied charity, embodied volunteerism, embodied stewardship and service, which, if we want to have any hope for future generations of getting outside of themselves, then we need more schools where this is the norm.
Actually, I like that. You know what? I was just reading an article from Forbes, and it says that uh, young people who have leveraged strong character or healthy characters and have gained skills from volunteering or soft skills are shown to be more successful. Those are tools that are shown to be more successful for them. So it's not just, yes, it's a spiritual aspect, but it's just aspect of generally character building when you're volunteering and giving yourself of your time and giving for a period of time. You're not even thinking about yourself, but you're thinking about someone else, which is not something naturally in today's world we're taught, right? Because kids just given instant gratification. But here, hey, you don't get instant gratification. You actually look to helping to serve a greater good of somebody else and not getting anything back, but just the joy and the happiness of being a blessing to the other is a big lesson. So I think that our generation, we need to contribute more to.
I couldn't agree more, Jen. And I think what you hit on there exactly, though, is the heart or the underlying motivation of it. And so much of the community service that we often see now in schools comes out of this whole, what is my value in the market?
Mhm.
How do I pad my resume to get
Exactly.
into the university program of choice so that I can I can make my mark on the world through my career, and my identity is in
Exactly.
my resume. And what you're talking about is something completely different. That my identity is grounded in who God says I am, and what
Mhm.
God said the purpose of my world is to be, which is to serve others, to love greatly, to serve my neighbors.
Exactly. I like that definitely. It's like, and it goes, and I love that you keep bringing it back to the identity, because when we understand where identity is, we're able to navigate every challenges and every things that looks foggy. All of a sudden, the fogginess goes away. Hey, you know what? This is who I am, and this is what I do. Because me coming from a consulting background, I remember, you're paid based on the hours that you are working. But at the same time, I have multiple people, my colleagues who are working with me. Sometimes they say, hey, extend this project a little longer, because there's no point finishing it this fast, because then we have to jump to another project. And from coming from the background, hey, my source is coming from God and my identity is in Christ, it was easy for me to respond to say, no, that's not the right thing to do. The right thing to is to serve them with excellence and in integrity and honesty, right? And if we can raise our next generation to work like that and look at God as their source and as their identity, I think they will be able to even deliver and achieve higher things. So exciting.
And it's so countercultural, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we read the words of Jesus, and the first shall be last, and you are not your own. Um,
Mhm.
to really create schools where these things are embodied is really powerful.
Exactly. I totally agree. On that note, now let's go to the other question that I have for you is, you know, so many schools are doing well. At the same time, there's challenges. So what are the challenges are facing today in Christian education that you would think that as you are heading this school, what are some of the key challenges that you would love to talk about, and how are you overcoming them?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's challenges for all schools in all types of schools. Some of
Mhm.
those are just really driven by market forces now. Things have become so expensive. Um, the challenge now of housing in places like Vancouver and Toronto create additional pressures on schools in terms of, can a teacher who's 26 years old afford to live in the Vancouver area? So we're having to be creative about, okay, how do we make that happen? How do we sustainably have
Mhm.
opportunities for people to teach here? Um, how do we create a school like our school? It's really important to our school and our stakeholders and our teachers that this remains a school that is viable for all the full spectrum of the socioeconomic opportunities. And so how do we continue to do that? We don't want schools to be only the privilege of really wealthy people. That's not within the Christian ethos. And
Mhm.
so how do we do that? So that's a challenge. We're a growing community. We're in the middle of trying to build a new middle school so that
Mhm.
our high school can get to a place where we're not cramped into corners. And
Yes.
so providing funding without capital investment from your government is a challenge. So any of those are just the obvious low hanging fruit things. I think the more challenging things though are more in the demographics, shifting demographics in our churches, and some of the beauty of the mosaic of culture that we see. Global church is coming to places like Langley, British Columbia now. It's not just people from a singular cultural background. It's really diverse, and with that comes some challenges, some nuances of how do we adapt to change, and how do we create schools where children are seen, are they see themselves in the leadership and the teaching faculty, and in the community, or the families that make up the community. So that's I think another challenge too is we have been, I think, in Christian communities very easily distracted by some of the politics. I think especially since COVID, we've been putting up walls, increasing racialism, tribalism, us and them. We like to say here that we, as a school, we don't. It's not an us and them. It's not us against the world. We have brothers and sisters in Christ, and we have neighbors. And our curriculum is designed to know God, love others, love your neighbors, and to live purposely. So those are just sort of broadly, I think, some of the challenges. I think market forces, the demographic changes, and some of the scarcity mindset that comes with that. But I think increasingly too, just being distracted by all of the things that I think are rooted in fear, not rooted in hope.
I love that. Exactly. And that's one way of removing that distraction, is that litmus test. Is this rooted in fear? Because as we know about the word, it says perfect love casts out all fear. So we just need to understand that perfect love of God so that we can remove that fear and stay focused on what God has in place for us in the areas that we're doing. I love that. Thank you, Adam, for that. I have one last question before we wrap it up. I'm having lots of fun here, but I know we have to wrap up soon, but I have one last question, if you don't mind. And that is this one. What are the opportunities for boards and leaders of Christian schools? What do they have, and what role can they play?
Boards and leaders of Christian schools, I think first and foremost in this aptly named age of anxiety, which is not unique. I think there was a lot of people writing in the 1920s about the Depression era being an age of anxiety as well. But I think in those times where there's perceived increased pressures and anxiety and inflation and demographic change and rapidly changing communities, the first opportunity for boards and leaders of Christian schools is to be a calm and non-anxious presence. That whatever the challenge is, this too shall pass. God has placed you for this, in this role, for this moment, at this time. God is sovereign, and there's a way forward through whatever the challenge is. I think we're in a period of time now too where people are more aware than ever of the importance of not just the education, but the particular kind of community that they're investing in. A lot of people are very savvy now, that realizing that it's not just a school, an education that I'm investing in. I'm sending my kids to school. This was a decision for my wife Emily and I. When we were looking at schooling for our kids, it's a minimum 30 hours a week. In some weeks, they're spending more time in their school community with their peers and they're the mentors and the coaches of their school community. We want to be intentional about who those people are and how they're speaking into our kids' lives, and the particular kind of communities that are being embodied with those people. And so there's an opportunity here, I think, as we are clearer about the kind of community that we are, welcoming and inviting people into that. That's a huge opportunity because there are some very distinctive choices in most of our communities. And yes, it requires a sacrifice. And yes, it requires an investment. And yes, you may be required to give to a level that might stretch you. But the eternal rewards, the rewards for your children, are potentially huge in their long-term spiritual development and in their health and confidence in who they really are. So I think if you keep those things front and center, you will see more opportunities now as a leader in these kinds of schools than you will see if you are completely focused on the worries and the troubles and the challenges that are sitting there in front of you.
I like that. I like how you mentioned it as an opportunity instead of as a worry, right? And I think that's when sometimes I'm on boards on Christian school as well. It's a when you ask somebody to come on board, they just get afraid. They just like, oh my goodness, like that's a whole ball game on its own. I don't know if I'm for it. And even going back to our time, like, do I have time for that? Do I have time to give of myself? All of that comes into play, right? But exactly like you said, if we can see that, you know what we're doing is having eternal changes. It's having changes in people's lives, where it's molding them to make that right decision, to have a relationship with God, and knowing that everything that we do in that board meeting is actually feeding to that. I think is definitely the right heart and the mind to come to those approaches on that. So that's beautiful.
I've been doing some thinking lately with a number of our staff around just the theology of work and understanding work generally from a biblical perspective, and this notion that we too easily divide up our lives into our work and our non-work. And what I love about a Christian school, whether you're a student or a parent or a board member or really anybody who has influence in the school, you have this opportunity to really be invited into the work of the kingdom,
Right.
and to steward as such, and to view it as such, that God is calling me in whatever my capacity is to give into really intentional work for His sake in this community, to impact others, and to really give back in a meaningful way to a much wider community that extends beyond your school. And that's a really beautiful thing.
It is. It is. And I love that how you put it as well. Because when we start looking at that now, not only at the board level and the leadership level, even in the teachers level, everybody's now coming into union with the same vision and same sound mind. And then so when the kids are talking to us, and as we're leading the kids, you're not confused on, oh, this is what this looks like, and we're not having conflict, right? And then they see a good role model, a good way to look at and say, hey, you know what, this is what life looks like, right? This is what a life with a believer's life look like, a saved person who believes in Jesus Christ as their Lord Savior looks like, right? Versus this, when people start, hey, you know what are you guys about? How come you guys always have this joy and this unity and this love, right? I always have somebody come in and say, how come you Christians are always so happy, and you guys look so joyful all the time? And I'm like, yes, let me tell you why. Right?
Well, and the key thing there is that that's not how the world always sees us. And in recent years, it's seen us as angry and upset, bitter, and political. And so it's important that we as leaders, again, I think circling back, we have this propensity, I think, especially on boards, but also in administrative roles in schools, to be always fearful and to always be looking at what are the liabilities and what are the risks of such and such, versus how is God asking me in this moment to participate in His mission and His vision for this community, and to stretch myself and to maybe make myself uncomfortable so that His name can be proclaimed, and that we are producing more and more graduates who love their neighbors, who know who God is, and who contribute in ways to our world that extends far beyond how much money they make or whether they have a successful career or not.
I love that. I love that. Well, we're off time right now, but I know for sure we would love to have you back, Adam, because you have wealth of information that to share with us. And even this, I believe that it at least gets us started to kind of think about what is Christian education. And you know what? There's a big part that, it plays in the journey of our character molding, of who we are, what our identity is and how we are. So thank you for what you're doing in Christian education. Thank you for your saying yes to your calling. And I know you're not doing it for the reward, but your reward is eternally big as we all enter into that when we see Jesus one day. But thank you from our whole heart for what you're doing, and we're so blessed that you have said yes to your calling.
I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you. Thanks, Jen.
Thank you. If you found that a blessing, please share this podcast with your friends and families. And we know that, what we're doing here in Christian education is just the start of something big. And it has not just started this recently, it's been going on for years. So we want to make this podcast available to many people, and we want to be a blessing to you. So if you can kindly share the podcast with anybody you know, and that will be a blessing, that will be amazing. Adam will be back, and I hope that whatever Adam shared will be a blessing to you. Stay blessed, and we'll talk to you soon.